Halloween is upon us. I thought we'd go ahead and make some decorations for the yard. I'm going to cut these figures out of plywood and affix a little bracket to the back, and then we can drive a stake in the ground and display these out in the yard. So let me show you how to make them. For the design of this, I want to make a pattern that I can use to make repetitive cuts since we're making more than one of these. I'm going to take a piece of poster board and lay it out on there. Now, you could certainly do it freehand. You don't have to make this fancy, whatever looks good to you. But if it would help you to have a little more guidance, what I did was I took a bunch of the candy corns that I had on hand, and I measured the width and the height and just averaged it out. And what it came out to is they were an average about 1 inch high and about 9/16 wide. So roughly they're about 60% as wide as they are tall. Now I planned on using cutting the plywood sheet in half. That would give us 24 inches of the 48, and so my candy corns are going to be not quite 24 inches high. I'm going to leave a little extra margin around the edges to cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out a corn which is 23 inches high, and based on that 60% proportion, that would give me a width of about 13 inches. So the first thing I'm going to do on the pattern is I'm going to draw a rectangle with that is 13 inches wide and 23 inches long, and that will give me some guidelines to work in. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to do this. You may have a hard time seeing this because I'm going to use a pencil to do this in case I decide I have to change these sides of these things, and obviously you can use any marking instrument that you have. I'm using this long straight edge just to make it easier, but you could certainly use a tape measure, framing square, whatever you have laying around. So there's 13, so let's draw that. Go down there. And we will go 24 the other way. And clearly for a project like that, this does not have to be exact. So we will not go crazy about that. Now, having done that, looking at this, I'm not happy with it. Yes, that is the proportion of the actual candies. However, this looks too tall and narrow to me, so I'm not happy with that. I'm going to make it. I think I'm going to make it a little bit fatter and a little bit shorter. So let's see if this does anything for us. I'm just going to lay the ruler out here, and I think this ruler is 1.5 inches wide. But you can, again, we're just judging here. It's not critical, so that will make it a little wider. Actually, let's see what that looks like. That might do the trick, just widening that a little bit. Maybe I don't have to fool with the height. All right, let's try it. We'll mark this, we'll cut it out, see what it looks like by itself, and then if that doesn't look good, then we'll do it over, that's all. No big deal with this. It should be a no-stress project. So I decided to flip this over and redo it. I didn't like that that extra line that was on there. It was throwing me off a little bit. So let me go ahead and lay the outline out again. So this time we'll lay it out 14.5 instead of 13. And the center of that would be 7.25. And what we can do is just take and make some guidelines. We're not going to follow this to make the pattern exactly. This is just to give us a rough idea of what the thing will, where these sides will be. We don't want them perfectly straight. We don't want these candy corns that look like they came out of a machine, and besides that, it kind of looked like a Christmas tree if we did it that way. I don't want to do that. So let's, we can just kind of pencil in like the corners here. So I'm just going to make a, I don't like the way that looks. I'm going to put a fairly decent radius on there. And if you are really struggling with it and not working out freehand, you can always take a some kind of a curved object and trace around it just to give you some idea of what you're going to do. I'm just going to freehand it. And let's do the bottom now. I'm going to start roughly in the middle here and put a little curve on it, and then sweep that up onto the sides. And we'll just, again, this is all rough dimensions. Just want to make that, okay, so that's good. Now, the corns have a little, the sides bulge out a little bit from the, they're not straight. They bulge out a little bit in the middle. So I want to replicate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of veer away from that line a little bit in the middle and then come back down and meet the other curves I just drew, so that I get that kind of bulging effect on the sides of it. Let's see how that looks. All right, that doesn't look too bad. When we cut these, we will use the pattern to draw out roughly where we're going to cut, but we're not going to follow these lines exactly. I want each of these to be a little bit different than the other ones and not look like they came out of a machine or out of a factory. They should have a crafty look to them. So we will, this is basically going to be a rough guideline of how we're going to cut it. So it's not important that it's perfect, or because it's going to vary a little bit, as you'll see when we mark them out. Okay, let me cut this out, and we shall see what it looks like after we got it cut. That looks pretty good to me. That certainly looks candy corn shaped, so I think that's more than good enough to use as the pattern for marking these when we cut them. So we'll consider that done. Now for the pumpkins, we're going to use half the sheet for the candy corns, and we'll use the other half for the pumpkins. We have a total of 24 inches to work with. I have room at the top to make a stem, so I'm not going to make the diameter of the pumpkin a full 24 inches. We'll cut it down. So I think we'll shoot for about 20. That'll give us enough. That should give us about 4 inches on the top to make put a stem on it. Now I don't have any implements, compasses or anything that are large enough to do to make a circle that large. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to mark 20 inches out here, and then I'm going to do it the other way as well. And the middle of that would be, I should have marked that before I move the ruler. The middle of that would be about 10 and 10, so that's roughly the center of that. Now, that's only giving me 2 points to work off of. So what I will do is put 10 inches in the middle and then mark the 0 and 20. And then I will do the same thing this way. And then we can connect the dots. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you can make more marks, but I'm not concerned that this is perfect, and I can see already we have a problem. There isn't enough room to do a proper stem, so that 20 inches is not going to work. Let's flip this over so we don't get confused by the marks and try this again. Let's make the diameter 18 inches this time and see if that helps out. So we will mark 18 inches, and we'll go 9 inches to the center, and then we'll do that the other way. It's 18, center is 9, and that'll give us a center mark. All right, that looks a lot better. And then what we'll do is we will put the 9-inch mark, the center of that, on the center mark we made. Make a mark at the 0 mark and the 18. And then we'll do that going roughly 45 degrees the other way. So that'll give us that and that. And then what we can do is that'll give us enough. That'll give us a rough shape of it, and we can freehand it from that point. If you are uncomfortable drawing the freehand part, just go around and make more marks. But I'm perfectly okay with doing it this way. It doesn't have to be perfect, and when we cut them out, we're not going to make a perfect circle anyway, because I don't think nature makes too many pumpkins that are perfectly round. So this is good enough. If we come across here and just make, all right, that shall do it. And then we'll put the stem up here. Now we have about 6 inches to work with, because that's 18. So that would be that mark there. That would be the width of the plywood, 24 inches. So we got plenty of room to put the stem on. Let's we can just draw something. It does not have to be perfect. Just draw whatever makes you happy. That'll be good. I'm happy with that. I'll fatten that a little bit. Just adjust it by eye. And then we'll cut this out, and we'll take a look and see what it looks like. A little tip when cutting this, when you get a big piece of scrap like that hanging off, it makes it difficult to maneuver the thing, so just whack it off there. And if you are cutting a radius, sometimes it's easier when cutting this to keep the scissors stationed, in one place, and turn the actual poster board. Cut that off when it gets awkward. I want to get rid of any sharp corners. And that's it. So that looks pretty decent. We can go with that. Again, we'll use this to mark it, but when we actually cut it, we will vary a little bit on the lines so they don't all end up looking the same. And I think that will be that'll work out pretty good. So we have the two patterns, and we're ready to go cut some plywood. Let's take a look at the tools we're going to need for the project. Once you have the patterns made, there's no further need for a measuring device. So once that's taken care of, you won't have to worry about that. We will need a saber saw, or what some people call a jigsaw, to cut out the items. You could use a coping saw if you're only doing a couple of them. It's a little tedious, but it would work if you don't have a saber saw. In this case, I'm going to make quite a few of them, so that would be kind of labor intensive, so I'm not going to use that this time. You'll need either a drill or an impact driver and the appropriate bit to drive the screws you're going to use, or you could do it with a screwdriver too, with the proper end on it. We'll need, of course, a pencil. We always need a pencil. And if you're going to put the screws in manually with the screwdriver, you'll need just a nail and a hammer in order to make a little hole to start the screw with. So this is a good project to undertake if you don't have a big pile of tools laying around. There's not much here, and even if you had to go out and buy this stuff, it wouldn't cost you an arm and a leg. Almost forgot to mention, we'll also need a paintbrush and either a screwdriver or a paint can key to open up the paint. As far as materials for the project, you'll need poster board or cardboard to make the patterns. You could actually just make these out of paper. It's just harder to trace around them when you're laying out the plywood, but poster board is probably the preferable option. You're going to need plywood, of course. Normally what I do is I kind of lay it out on the whiteboard how much you need, but this is going to depend on how big you make your candy corns and your pumpkins. Will also depend on how many of them you want to make. Out of a sheet of plywood, which I'm going to use the entire sheet, I ended up with 5 big pumpkins and 8 big candy canes, and then as you see when I lay out the plywood, I had a room in between them to make some smaller candy canes and pumpkins. So it depends on how many you want to make. You could use half a sheet, and then you should get about 3 pumpkins and 4 candy canes out of that. If you want to use a quarter sheet, you could get a couple candy canes, maybe 1 pumpkin. That's up to you. But as you'll see when we do the cutting, I'm going to use an entire sheet. And what I recommend you use is 1/2-inch plywood, a BC grade. That would be a 1B face. That's a smooth face on one side. C is a little rougher, and we'll make the B face the part that's going to show. Make sure the plywood is made with exterior glue. It'll say EXT on it. We don't want to put all the work into making these and have them deteriorate in the rain. We'll also need some material to make stakes with, if you don't already have something you can use. So we're going to use a 1 8-foot 2x4 and cut it up into smaller pieces. You'll also need screws, of course. You're going to need 1.5-inch general purpose screws. I like to get them with the Torx head on them because it's easier to drive them. And make sure these are rated for exterior use. Again, you don't want these corroding and ruining your paint job or having the thing fall apart. And a small box of these, 50 or so, would probably be enough depending on how many you're making. We'll need sandpaper to clean up the edges of the candy corns and pumpkins once we cut them out. 80 grit is fine. You don't need a big piece. Small piece is fine. And we'll need primer, a white gloss or semi-gloss paint. Quart is more than enough. If you're only making 2 or 3 of them, one of those little pints might be plenty. And we'll need orange paint and yellow paint, again, gloss or semi-gloss. So don't need an enormous amount of materials for it. And at the end of the project, as always, I will let you know how much this would have cost if you had to buy everything. Now let's mark this out so we can cut it. The plywood I bought is grade BC. That means there's 1 B side, 1 C side. When you're marking this out, if you're cutting this with a saber saw like I'm going to, you want to put the good side down. The reason for that is as the blade comes up out of the wood, it splinters the side that's towards you. So I want to keep the good side down so that when we actually cut this, the splintering will happen on what will be the back of the candy corns. So that will be the best way to do that. So let's mark these out. Usually use a pencil to do that, but I'm going to use a Sharpie just so you can see it a little better. And we'll just lay these here. Now I want to give myself a little room at the bottom so that we can make a better cut with it. If you lay it right to the bottom, it's tough to get a good curve on that side. So, and what we'll do is once we do one, we'll flip it over. This way this will maximize the number we can get in on this side, and we'll just keep flipping it as we go along. I just realized something as I was doing this. It doesn't really matter whether these are all cut exactly the same way, because when we paint them there's going to be variations in them, so they're not all going to look the same regardless. So I was planning on varying the cuts a little bit, not following the line exactly, but now that I think about it, it doesn't matter. Got 8 of the candy corns in, and there's a little bit piece left over. Maybe we can do something with that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the pumpkins. Let's see how many we can get out of this. So we got 5 pumpkins out of it. So 8 candy corns, 5 pumpkins. That's pretty cool. What I'm going to do is we have some little spots where there would have been waste. I'm going to draw in freehand some little candy corns or little pumpkins to use up the rest of the plywood. If you didn't see it already, I got a whole video about making these mini sawhorses, which I call crickets. And we're going to use these to lay the sheet on and do our cutting. In this case, we set the crickets up so that the end of the plywood overhangs the crickets. It makes it easier to cut, and we'll move the sheet along as we go so that we have that overhang to work with. And as always, remember to wear your safety glasses. So that's one down. Just rinse and repeat. You can see there's quite a bit of chipping out on the back side, the side that was facing us as we cut. But if you look at the other edge, that's nice and smooth, and that's the edge that's going to be showing to the public. So remember to put the sheet face down when you mark it and cut it. To make the stakes for this, all I did was I took a 2x4 and just ripped off a piece 3/4 of an inch wide. Obviously you could use stakes you already have if you have any laying around from the garden, or surveyor stakes, or whatever it is you have about. But the plans for this called for using the 2x4 in the material list and cutting these down, and I've made them about 2 feet long. That should be good enough. I also roughly cut a taper on the bottom end of it so it's easier to put into the ground. So in the past, when I've made items like this, this is a heart from Valentine's Day. Actually, my wife put this together, Mrs. Annette. What I've done is I've attached the stake to the actual item, and causes a little bit of a problem. I hope you can see it on there. When you drive it in, it tends to splinter the top of the stake, and it's difficult to drive it because you have to slide the hammer along the back of the decoration. So what I am going to do with this one is I want the stake to be separate from the decoration itself, so I can drive the stake first and then put the decoration on top of it. Now you could buy some metal brackets to encase this. Instead, I am going to do it using scraps. So what I have come up with is I cut some scrap pieces of plywood I had laying around, and you can use anything you have. And that's why I made the stakes 3/4 of an inch thick, because I have 3/4 plywood. And what we're going to do is just put this on here. I cut another scrap to go on top of it, and I did a similar thing for the top. The only difference is that, as you can see here, I added an extra piece in the middle, so that when we put the stake through, it'll slide up there and it'll stop and it won't go all the way through. So, and then I just, as I said, cut these little pieces to go on top of it. And once all that's secured, we can drive the stake in the ground and just slide this through there, and that'll hold it securely. What I'm going to do with these is I'm just going to glue these on here. You could certainly use screws, but there's not going to be a lot of load on this, so glue should be more than enough. So I'm going to just use some exterior glue on that to hold them down. Lay the stake on there. I'm just going to eyeball it, but if you would like to measure it and make it more precise, you can certainly do that. And then I'm just going to put some glue on the little blocks. I also took my utility knife and put what AVE would call a chamfer on the top of the stake so that the decoration would slide down over it easier. So when you go to paint, as always, make sure you give your paint a good stir, and you'll want to lay out some scrap blocks of wood or lay some nails out. This way you can set the without having it stick to the workbench. As we're priming this, the only thing that's critical is we want to make sure that we get plenty of primer on the edges. The grain that's exposed on the edge is going to suck up a lot of paint, and if this would be the one point where this water could penetrate into the decoration and eventually cause some rot. So I recommend using a brush on this rather than a roller. You could use a roller, but especially with the primer, we're really trying to force the paint down into the grain of the wood. And you can get a lot more mechanical pressure on it with the brush than you can with the roller. So especially for the primer, I strongly recommend that you use a brush with it, even though it takes a little longer. And what we're going to do is, this is the back. I'm going to give that a full coat and flip it over. There will be a little blemish on the back from laying on these, laying on the blocks that are keeping it off the paper. But that's okay. That's the back side. Nobody's going to see that. So, okay. So this is the good side. So the top is white, and then I'm actually using spray paint. So come in. We'll do the yellow on the bottom. Let those two dry and come back, and then we can do the orange in the middle. Good thing about using the spray paint as opposed to the brushed on is that it does dry pretty quick. You do have to be a little careful though with the ventilation. Make sure that you're in a well ventilated space or outside preferably. Now we're just going to paint on a little pumpkin face here. I'm going to take a smaller brush and sort of outline where I want things to go. And then just fill in there. If you want to, you can draw this on here with pencil first if you're not comfortable going right to the paint. But otherwise, just have at it. And you can adjust these if you want to. Just make them whatever size you are happy with. I'll be like Bob Ross here. We'll have a happy little pumpkin over here. And of course you can make any figure you want. If you need some ideas, I'm sure if you go on the interwebs, you will find tons of ideas for pumpkins. How to cut them. Nice. Some lines up and down it to simulate the grooves on the pumpkin. And then I'm going to take some brown paint up here at the top and do the stem brown so that it looks a little bit more authentic. A painted pumpkin. Another thing you can do is to put some yellow paint inside the eyes and the mouth and so forth to make it look like it's lit from the inside. Ooh, he's a happy little pumpkin. When you're ready to put the stakes in, take a screwdriver or a pry bar or something and drive it into the ground a little bit and work that around, and that'll give you a starting point for your stake. Drive it down as far as you need to. Let's wrap up this festive holiday project of ours. I did do one thing differently than I had planned on doing. Rather than screwing on the brackets that slide down over the stake, I ended up gluing them on. It was just simpler to do it that way. And what we ended up with, as far as the quantity is concerned, using a full sheet of plywood, we ended up with 8 of the large candy corns, 5 large pumpkins, 7 small candy corns, and 5 small pumpkins. And the smaller ones, you could have varied it either way you wanted it, since we were using whatever the scrap that was left over from the large ones. If you wanted more candy corns or more pumpkins, you could change the ratio. So out of a full sheet, that's what we got. I intend to give some of these away to friends, so I made quite a few of them. You may not want to make that many. A half a sheet of plywood would have probably been more than enough for most people. So that would have saved you a little bit of money. Speaking of which, let's add the cost up. The sheet of half-inch BC grade plywood was $34. I had glue on hand, but if I had to purchase it, it would have been about $5 for a pint. We ended up using 5 quarts of paint rather than 4. We had the primer, the orange, the yellow, and the white. And I forgot to include, when I spoke about the materials, I forgot to include the black paint to draw the faces on the pumpkins. So that ended up total being about $50. So the total was $90 now. If you were making a smaller number of the decorations, it might be more economical to use spray paint rather than buy the quarts. The spray paint cans are about $5 a piece, and one can would probably do about half a sheet's worth of decorations. So you might find it more economical to do it that way. If we had bought one can of spray paint for each color, that would have reduced the cost of the paint to about $25, so the total cost would have been reduced to about $65. Also, for painting the faces on the pumpkins, you can use craft paint. If you have any laying around, that might save you a few bucks. The only thing is you have to, because it's not really exterior paint, it's acrylic, you will have to put on a top coat of clear preservative. Put a good heavy coat on there to protect that so the faces on the pumpkins don't get damaged. I think of something else that might save us some money on future projects. Rather than buying cans of specific paint for each color that we want for each project, what we could do is we could buy five different colors. We could buy white, black, red, yellow, and blue. Red, yellow, and blue being primary colors. And if we had all of them, we could mix any color we wanted. For example, in regard to this project, if we had red and yellow, we could make orange. So what I might do before I do any more of these projects is to get either a quart or a gallon of each of those, have them on hand, and then regardless of what we do, we'll have the appropriate paint just by mixing the stuff together. I think I'm going to do a separate video explaining how to do the mixing, so stay tuned for that. One other thing, these are painter's triangles, and if you have to paint something on both sides, they have a very small point on them, and if you set them down and put the item on top of it, it only leaves a tiny little blemish. So in the case of doing this kind of decoration, since you have to paint both sides, this will speed things up a little bit. You can paint the back side, flip it over, and then work on the side that'll show the finished side of it, front side of it, and that'll speed things up. These are not expensive. I think I paid $4 or $5 for a pack of 10, so you might want to get a couple packs, and they will come in handy for other projects. Ended up spending a little over 6 hours on this project. Obviously, if you made fewer of them, your time would be shorter accordingly. So that's pretty much a wrap-up on it. It went very well, went pretty much as I expected. No major changes. And I hope you enjoyed this, and you'll watch again. Thanks. Enjoy your decorations. Have a great Halloween, and thanks for watching.